we're moving on to our third attempt at filming, I suppose, and made this up to look a little more professional and at least tell you where you are. A little later in the year, we thought we'd do a bit of filming at the Gill camp. That's Randy Coe. Stanley Peckover and his wife. This is the rather primitive engine of the 5 in 1962. I have a suspicion that's a great deal later gantry, but I wouldn't be prepared to vouch for that. I've introduced another bit of Kodachrome here that was taken in 1951. It's the descent into the main chamber, and this is the view of the main chamber. Our intention was to catch the visitors as they came down. This looks very much like my wife arriving. Presumably we were using that chair in 1962. It looks quite modern for that date. Hand over, get our stuff together. We're joining up with Hugh Bottomley, your wife, who was going to take the part of Cavers in this film, and Rob Pringle contributed a 5,000 candle power searchlight, or floodlight rather. We had our 2,000 candle power Tilly searchlight. Floodlight, no searchlight. Now Rob Pringle was always meticulous in keeping notes when he was taking pictures, and so he would do so on this occasion. But he had a camera to look after, a very superior 16mm camera. I think it was a Palar Bolex. I can just make out Hugh Bottomley, who was guiding Sylvia, as if she needed it, across the main chamber. Now you can enter the main chamber from the bar pot direction and look down from quite a height. So we of course are going in the other direction. We're heading towards bar pot, and I have to climb up here. Quite not a difficult climb, a very easy one in fact. I could probably do it now, probably. That's Sylvia following Hugh Bottomley. There's a telephone caller at the top, which can come in useful on occasions. I believe he announced his arrival. Oh, well, that's two of the party. It took quite a bit of organising, having two lots of lighting and two cameras. Oh, there's the telephone communication to the surface. Let them know we'd arrived. Quite a good actor, Hugh Bottomley. A long-standing CPC member even at that time. Someone suggested that we should have something to eat before we really got going. I don't think anybody objected to that proposal. I think our sandwiches were filled with a rather exotic dish made up from lobster tails. It's just a wee bit awkward as this passage, but in nowhere is it difficult. We were obviously out not to make it look not too easy, and it would lead us through to Paul Chamber. I think that must be the portcullis That is the name of that particular entrance to Pool Chamber. Hugh was going to put a demonstration on of backing and footing it above the pool. There you are, we've even got the date on there. Some reprobated obviously wanted to record their stay, and I assure you it's nothing to do with my party. Hugh, of course, is entering into Pool Chamber, and you can make out that there is in fact a pool. At some point along here, he's got to decide to work his way up above the water, but if you made your way to the far end, it does in fact bring you back into the main chamber again, near the west slope. We're not going to bother with that today, but you can probably see why. I think some of us were mean enough to hope that he would make a mistake and fall in, but he didn't oblige. When he got back, when we said that, he said, well, if he'd only known, he would have done it for us. But he had a rather miserable wet session of probably an hour or two afterwards. What goes up must come down. There's some complaint of the splashing of water. Hugh appears. Nearly on dry land again, and we're going that much a bit further. I think we were probably heading towards Sand Cavern, and I've introduced a bit of old elephant colour, outdated stuff, and it had produced, make out a little tiny figure just right of centre, and that's a wife on the climb up beyond Sand Cavern. And that will be taken, I think, that picture, that part of the film, in 1952 as was this. It was a very fine stalagmite pillar. There's a fine show of stalactites too above it. Still on elephant colour, taken in 1950 or 1951. 1950 I think it was. That's quite a handsome formation. I'm not so sure of that. Presumably it was in the same passage, but it doesn't really matter where it was, except for an archive film, which this may well be. But I dare say there's some amongst the people watching would have recognised it and would tell me that it was in Clapham Cay, because it's known then. We've arrived at Bar Pot, and there's a ladder going up to the surface. We've returned to the main chamber to get a view from the top of the west slope of the old man and the old woman of Gaping Gill. Now it's now time to come out. Now I think the winch might well have been there in 1962, but I think the gantry would be later. So it all fits in very nicely, and it brings us up to the surface. Have to watch your knees at that point, and as mine stick out longer than most, can be a bit painful. We look after our customers very well and make sure there's something underneath them when they're released, so they can make their way up to the surface and hopefully enjoy some sunshine. So that's Brian Varley. Brian Varley was there in 1951 when we took the film of the main chamber. I had to leave and go back to catch the boat at Belfast, but you do get a brief glimpse of Middle Washfold. I think this was John, was myself, and Stephen Craven, Dr. Stephen Craven, and we planned to make a little film of Middle Washfold Cave, the stream on its way through, about half a mile I suppose it would be, to where it comes out of the waterfall in Great Dowk in Chapel-le-Dale. That's all we finished up with, I'm afraid, in Middle Washfold, because I believe I dropped the camera, and after that it had to go away for repairs because everyone was moving very rapidly indeed. The next venture, I suppose it would be, was we were potholing up at Allen Pot, and it seemed a good opportunity, if there were any willing helpers, to go into up along Churn and photograph our journey through there. It might nearly have been a non-starter, because I was wearing some brand new New Zealand surplus army boots, heavily nailed, and they're not a good idea, because I skidded on the smooth rock, landed up on my back, complete with pack of batteries and the lot. They were kind enough to lever me up into a vertical position, and we continued caving. Everyone was out to make this quite an epic, with plenty of tramping through very, very wet passages, and I think we made our way fairly quickly, and making it look as wet as possible, until we reached Dr. Bannister's hand basin. This is really the top exit, or inlet if you wish, of up along Churn. There's usually a fair amount of water coming down, and so if you want to climb it you have to be extremely careful. You've a precious little chance of staying dry, but if you're lucky you wedge yourself across the rather tubular passage and get to the top in daylight. I don't think anybody went out on this occasion, but they played around under the waterfall to make it look as interesting as possible. It would appear to be quite a good slice of the Craven Pothole Club were queuing up to get wet under Dr. Bannister's hand basin. So you see it from various aspects. Not really a lot one can say at this point, except Sid Peru, with the help of others no doubt, apart from the Craven Pothole Club, made several underground films. And when he decided that he'd finished what he was doing, and the party that those that had taken part, they would celebrate in up along Churn. I was invited to join in, and we had a meal and a drink and made our way home eventually. I should add that I didn't take any part in films of a really fine underground photographer. My wife did pay me a compliment at one point, and she said, that bit was not bad. You could compare it with some of Sid Peru's. I think she was probably comparing it with the lesser good parts of Sid Peru's films. But he had the same problem as me, but he had more facilities in getting the light. But I'm still marvelling once again at how well the batteries stood up. Admittedly, you can see there's a certain falling off in the quality of the light as it gets into the red. I think all of this would be in Upper Longchurn. It looks as if some latecomers have arrived. And Dr. Bannister's hand basin, unless this is another waterfall I've forgotten about. A more likely explanation would be that the editing went a little awry at that point. Well, I think that's the last bit of film I have to show, and I hope you enjoyed it. Features there, which we covered rather hurriedly, the great gores were exposed when the water was drained out of the cave quite early in the 19th century. It's a nice flat path to follow, and you can see the beehive on one side and the sword of Damocles on the other. Quite a number of this organ type formation, and it looks as if it's might be Mike Greenway who's making his way through the cave. The lighting here was of just the 4-car headlights run from a battery. I think the previous formation was the Flitch of Bacon, and this, I suppose, appropriately enough, will be the shower bath. Everything has a rather reddish colour, possibly due to the lighting running at a rather low colour temperature. Quite a bit of water flowing in the cave, keeping the formations nice and wet and reflective, rather than dry and uninteresting. I think that is a Christmas pudding and sauce. And these interestingly shaped wall formations. Managed to keep the illumination fairly reasonable. Didn't try to cover too big an area. Now, whether this is a matter of editing, but that piece of film that's got in there came from somewhere else, I must admit. But we are back in Ingleborough Cave, or Clun Cave as it was then, and I think this is all lumped with Mungo. Oh, this is definitely Mungo Gill. And David Johnson is demonstrating to our star of Gunnerfleet, our chattering Timothy, something to do with the cave. This is definitely a bit of a hodgepodge. That was a brief glimpse of something you shouldn't do in a cave, and that's write your name up. I think the person who put the film on DVD had a little bit of rescue work to do, because here we are back in Edinburgh Cave again. We've reached the lady's cushion. It's not one you'd want to sit on, there's quite a steady flow of water over it. We're not all that far off the end of the cave as far as the visitors are concerned. You're faced by the waters of the Styx. I think that's Mike Greenway still acting his part and making his way towards the Styx, keeping dry as possible. It's really more than, shall we say, knee deep. But when you get beyond that point, you're heading in the direction of Gaping Gill. And of course there's flat out places and also areas where only divers can get through. If my memory serves me right, beyond the Styx, there is another part of the cave where you pass through into, I think it's Giant's Hall, well decorated, some fine formations, but I don't think we captured them on this occasion. There's too much flowing in to keep out of the water. This is within the main chamber, just as you enter. I think we've got David Johnson with us again, and he's doing a little demonstration on rock climbing. That climb, of course, doesn't really go anywhere, but provides a bit of an excuse. Now this was taken with just above the flow of water, heading for the window. The window is a 20-foot drop or thereabouts from the entry passage down into the main chamber. One of the party was the late John Frankland, and he thought he'd provide a bit of interest for us and would demonstrate by plunging into the stream, which should only be a few inches deep, and worming his way along the passage in the water. He knew perfectly well that he wouldn't be washed over the window. When he made his way back again, he was completely and utterly sodden. He spent most of the following week in bed, recovering. He never had a wetsuit, he never believed in one, even though Randy Coe said to him on one occasion, "And if you have one of these, Johnny," he said, "it'll prolong your potholing life at least another 10 years. And he said, "I'm not so sure that I want to." And he never did. There he is coming back again, having inspected the window. I think we did save this bit until we were on our way out rather than on our way in. Seemed kinder somehow. On this occasion we had our two 12-volt batteries with the 4 car headlights. Only really described this as larking about in Goyden Pot. Give credit where credit is due, they were sufficiently interested in this new process of filming to take part very willingly. We've now moved on to Mungo Gill, and if you think this is a little bit hurried, well, we gave the explanation that the older members of the club had the opportunity after the annual dinner to make their way in. Well, since we've had a bit of Mungo Gill, the comparatively new discovery near Stump Cross, the two caves being connected, we move on to the next tape.